What is up, guys? Holy cow. What's wrong with my voice? Seriously feels like my voice is gone. What is up? What is up, guys? No? Still feels weird. Okay. What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive. You see, it's just... something's not right. This isn't a bit. Like, it legit feels wrong. What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive, diving deeper into the Nightmare Cup this month. This is our last full week of doing deep dives for the Nightmare Cup, and I have to say, this one's going to be exciting, actually. Hopefully in this last week we do get to touch on some of the I don't want to say like non-meta Pokemon, but the Pokemon that aren't as relevant but are really exciting to talk about. We have talked about a ton of different Pokemon already, so hopefully that's still able to happen. But remember, if you guys have any deep dive ideas, that you can just comment them and we'll do those. So anyways, today we are talking about Alolan Raticate. As promised, I told you guys I would do this. So Alolan Raticate is a dark and normal type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board. You can achieve a 1705 on the CP, which is really good. That's just phenomenal for the Great League. Now you can achieve a 1499 with a 0 on attack, 13 defense, and 14 stamina at level 39. And according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran, Alolan Raticate does rank somewhere around 6th in bulk and 12th in stat products, so pretty good there. And all of this comes from his base stats. His base stats are just a really good spread for PvP in general. We have a low attack, and then we have two higher defense and stamina values here. A 135 on attack, 154 defense, and 181 on the stamina. Looking pretty sweet. Now for our moves here, we actually do have an interesting thing where Alolan Raticate gets a stat bonus from every single move that he has, which is really cool. Being dark and normal, he does have some drawbacks with his typing, being quad weak to fighting, but the moveset that we build with our Alolan Raticate can actually influence some of the matchups. As we saw in the versus video with Umbreon, I did go with the bite on the fast move instead of quick attack, and a lot of people were like, whoa, wait a minute. And I tried to explain it in that video. Basically, this deep dive hadn't happened yet, so I had not looked into his actual moveset that much. After this video, I do feel like bite is still very viable, very good, but it makes him more of a specialist, whereas quick attack makes him a big generalist. And we'll get to those numbers in just a second. Bite here, 2 energy per turn, 4 damage per turn. After stab, we do have this 4.8, which, oh, that's big. Quick attack here for 3.5 energy per turn. You do get 2.5 damage per turn. After stab, it does bump up to 3 full damage per turn, so it's not that bad, actually. Out of these two moves here, I definitely do think that whichever one you choose does really determine how your Alolan Raticate will play out. Like I said, Bite is definitely a more specialist role, while Quick Attack is definitely a more generalist role. Just kind of really depends on which one you're needing for your team, for which fast move that you choose here. Next, let's actually move on to our charge moves. Crunch here is our first one, costing 45 for 70 damage at a 1.56 damage per energy ratio. After stab, it does get bumped up to this 84 damage at a 1.86, which is really respectable. Hyper Fang costing 50 for 80 damage at a 1.6 damage per energy ratio. After stab, it does get bumped up to this 96 damage, which does make its damage per energy ratio all the way up to 1.92. Lastly, we do have Hyper Beam here, costing 80 for 150 damage at a 1.88 damage per energy ratio. After stab, though, it does go up to 180 on the damage for a 2.25 damage per energy ratio. Holy cow, is that big. Now, out of these moves, I definitely do think there is something to be said about Hyper Beam because it is such a really hard-hitting move. It does have a big payoff whenever it comes to our damage, but I really think what Alolan Raticate really banks on is having these two super quick charging moves here. So like if you have Bite, you're going to be able to put in tons of damage right out of the gate while not heavily relying as much on your charge moves. But if you're using Quick Attack, you don't nearly have the same amount of damage as you would with Bite. So these charge moves really come a little bit more of a need for you to get to. Well, that energy trade-off between both of those works out really good, because Crunch is really fast to charge up. Especially with Quick Attack, you're going to get there in just over like 5 or 6 seconds. And then Hyper Fang is not far behind that. Really fast, really quick. And I mean, both of them, even both of these have really good payoffs. 1.86 and 1.92 after stab is no joke. That's actually pretty freaking great. Since I went with Bite in the versus video, I actually decided to go with the Quick Attack here. Quick Attack, Crunch, and Hyper Fang was the moveset that I actually went with, only because Quick Attack, definitely more of a generalist moveset, and since we do need to rely on a little bit more of this damage here, we're going to go with the quicker moves, being that we need to just pump out as much damage as possible. We don't want to have to wait around until we get to that Hyper Beam to actually get a bunch of payoff. And especially, it can be said, because we do have a quad weakness to fighting, we may never even get to fire this Hyper Beam off. So let's actually move on with our shield situations here. So, of course, like I said, Quick Attack, Crunch, and Hyper Fang is our moveset for the rest of this video. But in terms of our shields, in this 0 versus 0, or kind of like in our closing situation where neither myself nor my opponent has any shields, we actually win 50.7% of the matchups, that's pretty good. Definitely more than half in this rock, paper, scissors type meta is always a good thing, considering that we beat at least enough Pokemon to say, hey, we basically beat an entire typing's worth of Pokemon, plus quite a few we're actually beating a lot more than one typing. Definitely good. Next scenario is this 2 versus 0, or while I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any shields, we actually end up winning 79.1% of those matchups. And most of the ones that we're looking for here are not the ones that we're winning against, but definitely the ones that we lose against. Whenever I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any, I'm actually looking for the Pokemon that I can't beat. I just want to know which Pokemon still flat out beat me, even though I have complete shield advantage. And to no one's surprise here, definitely the fighters. A lot of the fighting types fall into this category where they can just still flat out beat us, and there are a couple of other Pokemon that can actually do some good damage here. Moveset actually being one, which we'll get to shortly. Our next scenario is actually a 0 versus 2 shield situation right here, which is basically where I have no shields and my opponent actually has 2 shields. And here I'm actually looking at the ones that we do win against, because when my opponent has 2 shields, I want to know which Pokemon I can still flat out beat. And in this scenario, it's a lot of the Psychic types and Spiritomb. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Spiritomb shows up in this list. But basically, with Quick Attack, we're able to do tons of neutral damage right out of the gate. The fact that Crunch is so fast to charge and so easy to fire off, we can still break through 2 shields and then some to actually beat a few of the Psychic types. Now, this isn't a lot of the Psychic types by any means. I'm talking Spoink, Drowsy, Mr. Mime, Grumpig, Espeon, Execute, and then Spiritomb shows up there. So, while Psychic, not the entire typing, literally just a snapshot of like 7 of these, that's 6 Psychics. Our last shield situation here is the 2 versus 2, or the mock-up like opening type situation. Whenever both Pokemon do have both shields ready and available, we actually end up winning 50.7%. Yeah, it's the same. So, what does that actually tell you? Well, what that tells me is that whichever way I want to go, I can either open or close with Alolan Raticate and feel pretty secure about going into those matchups. Speaking of, let's actually move into some matchups here. So in all of my deep dives, I actually end up taking our subject Pokemon, Alolan Raticate today, and I stick them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the cup just to kind of see how they do. I do want to remind you that all of these simulations here are run with a 1v1 shield scenario to try to give both Pokemon the most even playing field possible. Now, as far as these matchups go, we actually do pretty well in this, but if you've paid a lot of attention to these matchups, the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon do consist of a lot of Psychics and a few Darks with not a single fighting type. Except for Poliwrath, he does make a few appearances here. Because Poliwrath is actually the 11th bulkiest, I don't end up including the subject Pokemon as a bulky Pokemon because generally that either ends in a tie or you're just going to have a moveset that beats another Pokemon. It's a long story, okay? But Poliwrath is the only fighting type that does ever show up here. So as far as our wins go, we actually win against Umbreon, Hypno, Claydol, Bronzong, Metang, Slowbro, Slowking, and Grumpig. Woo! That's pretty crazy. And I did run it both ways with Bronzong here. Either Feint Attack or Confusion. He does still end up losing both scenarios. So that's still a pretty good win column for our Alolan Raticate. Now as far as the losses, this guy. Come on. This guy? Yeah, don't forget that Wobbuffet, on his fast moves, he actually does have access to Counter, which of course we know is an absurd fighting move, and it just is gonna wreck us, no matter which way you look at it. Poliwrath here having access to a ton of fighting moves. What can you really do? Our next section here is countering this Alolan Raticate. So if we're gonna take Alolan Raticate and put him on our team, this is what we need to focus our attention on. What are we actually gonna be countering with this Alolan Raticate versus what do we actually bring to the table if we want to counter an Alolan Raticate? And as far as what we actually should be focusing our attention on, the Psychic types here are pretty key. So literally the only Psychic type that we actually end up losing to is Wobbuffet. Now there is something to be said about Starmie here because if you do have Hidden Power Fighting, you can actually wreck an Alolan Raticate. So if you do have that particular moveset, I guess that is something you could use your Starmie for. Not trying to throw shade at Starmie by any means. After those two though, Bronzong is a really close matchup, Metang is really close, Raichu really close, Smoochum actually, Solrock, Lunatone, Gallade, all of these get easier as we go here. Slowking, Slowbro get easier, Xatu's not too bad at all. Mr. Mime pretty easy, Gardevoir pretty easy, Chimecho is actually the easiest Psychic type to go up against with Alolan Raticate here. Our next thing that we actually want to focus our attention on are the Dark types. Yeah, considering that we are a Dark type ourselves, we are going to be able to resist a ton of the damage that they're dealing while being able with Quick Attack to deal a ton of neutral damage and then whipping out that Hyper Fang for a big payoff in our damage here. The only ones that we actually have problems with are Alolan Muck and Tyranitar. Flat out of the gate, both of those do have movesets that can beat us. Now, Sneasel, Shiftry, Sharpedo, all can actually end up tying against the Alolan Raticate, but they don't have a just flat out crazy advantage against us. We can at least tie against them. From here, it does get easier though. Umbreon is a really close matchup. Skuntank, Absol, Drapion, Houndoom, Spiritomb, Weavile, Honchkrow, all of these actually fall into a pretty easy category as Dark types to go up against, considering that we can just output a ton of neutral damage and actually take a lot of resisted damage in return. Now as far as what we actually want to bring to the table to actually combat the Alolan Raticate, it's not that hard to combat this guy because the fighting types do amazing up against us. Combusken and Gallade are the only ones that actually do have trouble with Alolan Raticate. Gallade carrying that awkward typing can make a lot of the damage that we end up dealing to him neutral, while we do actually resist some of the stuff with Gallade. Oddly enough, with low kick, Gallade can actually end up beating us, but if we switch it over to Confusion, it is a little bit of a different scenario. The Alolan Raticate can actually beat the Gallade if Gallade is using Confusion, which we talked about on Saturday, that Confusion seems to be just a better move than low kick anyways. So yeah. From there, it just gets blatantly bad. Machop is a really difficult matchup, and he's the easiest one for Alolan Raticate. Hitmonlee actually being really good up against us, and it just gets worse and worse. Poliwrath, Machamp, Primeape, Toxicroak, Blaziken. Lucario is actually the worst possible matchup for our Alolan Raticate inside of the fighting types here. So, as you can see, the fighting types are going to be the bane of your existence, but he does have a lot of upside to him. I mean, these are really important. While that is really bad, I don't know necessarily that that can outweigh all of this good. But that is actually for you guys to decide if Alolan Raticate outweighs the cons with its pros. Which, let's actually get into some pros and cons here. So I actually have one for both sides today. No surprise, the con that I actually have is that it does die really hard to the fighting types. And whenever you build your team, you're generally knowing that the Darks are going to have a weakness to the fighting types. Just like Toxicroak has a quad weakness to Confusion. I mean, does that really stop you from using Toxicroak? If that stops you from using Toxicroak, maybe Alolan Raticate is going to be a similar situation for you. But it just depends on how you play. The kamikaze in me loves the fact that I have such a great Pokemon, but it does have such a glaring weakness. The actual pro that I have for Alolan Raticate here is that he's an amazing generalist. An amazing generalist. With this moveset, he actually puts up some really good numbers, but not only those really good numbers, he puts up amazing numbers against these two typings. Yeah, this 79 is definitely not the highest that we've seen. This 10.4 is definitely not the highest that we've seen. But it's because these fighting types take so much away from that percentage that this gets overshadowed. Literally, the Psychics only losing to Wobbuffet, asterisk Starmie. And then in Dark types, only losing to Alolan Muck and Tyranitar and having 3 ties. Whoa, that's big. That's so big. I definitely think that just this raw amount of wins is so big that Alolan Raticate is a big threat. And I know that a lot of people have already been talking about him, already been using him, and have great success with him. But I can't recommend him enough. I really can't. I really do think that he will fit on a lot of teams really well. And I like the fact that it's only a fast TM away from being a specialist or a generalist. Definitely do like that aspect, because that means that not only is he going to be a pretty cheap investment into getting the moveset that you want, but you can kind of have 2 rolls at the tip of your fingers here. So that is actually all that I have for Alolan Raticate. I'm sorry that my voice is like, I sound like I'm a dying old woman for some reason, but today is like a big day to record for me, so I planned on recording like 3 or 4 videos today. Hopefully I can get through all of them, but with my voice like this, I hope I don't literally talk my voice out. So, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said in the beginning of the video, if you have any deep dive suggestions, please let me know down below. Also, if you have any versus ideas, because this weekend is the last weekend for the Nightmare Cup, which means we're going to go over 2 versus videos. I do have a couple of ideas already in the works, but I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have anything that you'd want to see, I'd much rather give you guys the content that you are wanting rather than just doing versus videos because they're up there. But that is actually it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.